Suppose we want a program that prints out something like this. And let's say we had to use nested loops in order to do it. Right here, I have all of the system.out.println statements, but I'm going to show you how we can use nested loops in order to do this instead. So if you look over this, you'll see that there are 11 rows. So we're going to want a loop that does 11 things, right? We're going to want 11 iterations of this so that we have each one of these rows. And then within the rows, we either have 10 dashes or we have 10 ones and zeros, and it depends on what row you're on. So every other row we have the dashes, and every other row we have these ones and zeros. So we're going to want an inner loop that goes ahead and prints out one by one all of these, or prints out all of these one by one, the ones and zeros. So let's go ahead and start with our outer loop. So we know we want to have 11 rows. So we're going to go ahead and do I is less than 11. So we know that when we start at 0, we go from 0 and we keep incrementing at the end of this for loop. So what's going to happen is we're going to go from the numbers 0 to 10, and we know from the numbers 0 to 10 there are actually 11 times that it's going to iterate, because we count 0 as one of them up to 10. That is 11 numbers actually. So that's why we're putting I is less than 11 here. If we put less than or equal, it would actually do 12. So that will be our outer loop, and then our inner loop, we know we'll have to use a different variable here. We'll declare it. And we said there are 10 things in here, right? So we're going to say j is less than 10. It's a common mistake to accidentally put I here when you really want j. So for example, if I put I here instead, we would actually fall into an infinite loop here because j would never get incremented and this would never turn out to be false. So you want to make sure you double check this line here because it's very common to mess up. So this inner loop is going to handle printing out one by one all of these guys or all of these guys. So what we're seeing is that we have dashes and we have ones and zeros. So how do we know whether we have dashes or ones and zeros? We know that we're keeping track of what row we're on, and that has to do with our outer loop, right? So if we have I is 0, we know that we're on this row, and if we have I is 1, we're on this row. If we have I is 2, we're on this row. And what you'll see is if the index is 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, so if the index is an even number, we know we're going to have these dashes. And if it's an odd number, we know we're going to have these ones and zeros. So we're going to want to use this I in order to determine what row we're on. So if we're on row 0, then we know we need to do dashes. So what we can do is utilize our handy dandy if statements. So what we want to say here is if the row we're on is an even row, then we're going to print out a dash. So what we could do here is we could say if I mod 2 is equivalent to 0. So what this is saying is, remember mod means we're going to divide it and get the remainder. So if you get, for example, 0 and you divide it by 2, what would be the remainder? Is that remainder equal to 0? If it is, then this evaluates to true and we do this code. If it does not equal 0, then we don't do this code. So if I is 0, we know this will be true. If I is 2, 2 divided by 2 is just 1, remainder is 0, so we know it's true there as well. So this is sort of a trick in order to determine whether a number is even or not, because if it is even, then 2 will divide by it perfectly, and if it's not even, then we will get a remainder of 1, and 1 does not equal 0, so we won't make it in here. Now we have an else. So if it's not an even number, then it's an odd one, and we have to do these ones and zeros. For now, I'm just going to print out 1 just so that we could see that this worked. So I'm going to go ahead and in any other case, just print 1 so that all of these odd index rows will just show a 1 instead of our 1 zeros. So here we have some weirdness going on. Now notice how this code up here is from this. So I'm going to go ahead and erase it so we don't have any confusion here. And notice how we're not printing a line. So everything's sort of next to each other instead of shifting to the next line. So what we could do here is add right after our loop. So right after we're done with each one of these, we can add system.out.print line so that it goes to the next line. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this again so you can see what it's looking like. Now we have our enters and it's looking a little better. Now remember, we did have lines in front and behind each one of these. So notice that that's something that comes before and after our inner loop, right? That's printing these guys out. So what we could do here is right before this inner loop that prints out all of these, we can print out one of our lines. And I'm gonna go ahead and not put the LN here so that it stays in the same line as all of these. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add one more line to the end, and then we should go to the next line, right? So instead of having an empty string here, I can add in this line. So you'll see it's gonna look a little bit better now. And then all we will have left to do is fix up our zeros. So we want a 0 here and here. So what you'll notice is that J is handling the inner loop. So J is handling these guys, and J is keeping track of which one we're on, right? So if J is 0, we're printing out this first one. If J is 1, we're printing out the second one. J is 2, this third one. Same thing here. If J is 0, it's this one. So we can use the same sort of logic for these. So if J is 1, if J is 0, we want to print out a 1. But if J is 1, we want to print out a 0. Because remember before we had 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. So here we can use the same sort of logic. If J is even, then we want a 1. And if J is odd, then we want a 0. So what we could do is say, we only print out 1 if J, not I, J mod 2 is 0. Else, if this is not true and this is not true, then we know we want to just print out a 0. So this is how we will jump into this last code that says, if it is in one of these rows, and we're on an odd index, so index 1 here, because this one's 0, so we have 1, 3. For one of these odd indexes, then we will do this 0. So I'm gonna go ahead and run it just so that you can see our finished product that looks just like it did before with our system.out.print statements. So here it is. We have all of our correct rows with our 1s and 0s.